Any observation of any of the four panelists? Please come forward. Ganeshji has the microphone there. It will be repeated here as well. And Ganeshji has a microphone in the back. He'll bring it forward. I will raise the first question, since no one else is asking. First question. Ji, please.
I have a very fundamental question. What is... I guess it would be, what is the soul and what made you first believe in the concept of the soul?
Are you directing the question to any one particular panelist?
Yeah.
The question is, what is soul? The fundamental question is, what is soul and what is the...
What made you first believe in that concept?
What made you first believe in the concept of soul?
I think the soul is in each and every one of us, and I'll tell you why it's so. As we grow up, we see ourselves changing. You can remember yourself as a little boy, growing up, going to school where you lived, and then you came here, or whatever the case may be. You remember all these things. You remember you grew up when you get an adult life or adolescent life, etc. And the adults remember all their past history. So for them to see that change, because you change, right? You grow, you change. For you to see that change, there has to be a changeless entity within you. And that changeless, because if there's no changeless entity in you, and you are changing and everything else is changing, then there's no one else to see the change. So to see the change, there has to be something that is changeless within you. And that changeless something within you is we identify as that Atman, that soul, that living being, that entity. And what Dr. Subhash spoke about today, also you have to go within yourself, deep within yourself, to find that being. So I think this is what we call the soul. And why we believe in a soul? Because as Hindus believe, the Jivatma, the karma of the Jiva that is attached to the Atma is called the Jivatma. You know, the karma is the things that you've done. Is that when his body is disposed of, then the Jivatma goes away. That Jivatma then merges with the ethereal space and is either born back again or liberated, as the case may be. So this is why we believe that there, and we think that there's a Hiranyagarbha. We talked about a Bandhu this morning, where the Brahman and the Pind, and we are all a particle of that Brahman. The Brahman means that cosmic universe. We are all the Paramatma. We are all, the Atma is part of the Paramatma. That's my explanation. But if Subhash, you would like to put more light on that? It's great. Can you believe that? And I'm not even a Vedic scholar. So there you go.
You feel that...
Just stop.
You feel that the panelists have all the answers. No. Ultimately, all the answers are not available except through your own personal experience. I have a very practical suggestion for you all. When I ask you, who are you? You will say, I am so and so, but that's your name. That's not you. Or you will say, this is I. So that's your body. It's not you. Who is it within you that says, I am? Ask yourself, whether it is your body or any part of your body, your history of life. You will say, I was born, I grew up, studied at a university, at a school, this and that, you remember your history. Now, whose history is that? Is that the history of your body? Is that the history of your mind? Is that your history? And you have been a witness of that history. And you are that something which has collected and consolidated that history in you. So simple question is, who am I? Now listen, when modern philosophy began, there was a French philosopher called Descartes. Descartes said, I doubt everything. I take nothing for granted. But then he said, I cannot doubt that I doubt. Because if I doubt that I doubt, then the whole thing is gone. And if I'm sure that I doubt, then it means I think. And if I think, then I am something that thinks. Therefore I am. So, when you want to ask what is the soul, it is not the other person who will answer. You yourself will answer. What is this I that says I am? That's the way I understand it. Because I refuse to be denied. I insist on myself. You insist on your identity. Whether your identity is your body or your home, everything that is other than this I belongs to you. But that something to which it all belongs, that is the soul. A very practical way of understanding. Thank you.
The answer to the question which you actually asked has been answered beautifully and fully and completely. I want to just address another aspect of it, which is when we ask questions, particularly when youth ask questions, the question arises from a place within us that is wanting an experience or wanting to understand an experience. Dr. Dubé and our other panelists may be able to give you explanations, information, even knowledge about the soul that makes perfect sense to you, that convinces you from the neck up. But then the question becomes, where does that leave you? And what I want to add to this is that when you're asking about a soul, the real question is, how can I know that soul? Once I accept that it exists, once the respected teachers or leaders have convinced me intellectually that yes, it exists, then the second part is, okay, how can I come to know that? How can I experience that? If what I am is a drop of water that's part and parcel of this universal ocean, how can I have that experience of being not just an isolated drop, but how can I have that experience of being part of the ocean? And that's where the actual spiritual practice comes in. What the knowledge gives us is the quest to go further, the thirst that yes, there is something there is something worth searching for, there is this soul, but you still have to do the work to have that experience. If someone says to you, say you've got a younger brother or a younger friend who says to you, does love really exist? Prove to me that love exists. You could talk yourself till you were blue in the face, but chances are all of the words that you used were not going to give that person the experience of love. You might convince him that yes, it exists, that there is this thing, but it's not going to leave him or her internally any richer or fuller for the experience. All you can do is say, don't worry, sweetheart. Someday, you too will have the experience of being in love. And then you too will understand, not just that it exists, but how it changes our life. And the awareness of the soul is the same. They can give you the answers, we can provide you with evidence, but at the end of the day, really what we can say to you is, if you engage in a spiritual practice, pray, meditate, contemplate, whatever it is, someday you too will actually have that experience, that knowledge, that awareness, and that's what will change you.
May I suggest that we keep the applause for the end, because then we can get more questions.
My name is Al-Ramji to Dr. Koch. You wrote a book on scientific origin of Hinduism, and on the glossary,
Yes, please hear you.
on the glossary it says twin god, Vedic, and there are other gods in Sanskrit term, but there is one in Lokic term. Can you explain that to me? And hold a minute. About, I think I can put something on the soul here. The soul is made up of dimensionless unit. God is made up of dimensionless unity. And the matter, which is property, is dimensionless. Thank you.
For the sake of the television, Tataji said that the question must be repeated, Suvashi, so I...
Suvashi will repeat.
Unless you want.
Well, I suppose the question was, can God be defined in abstract mathematical term? Because if you look at all of science, science is abstractions. It's about abstractions, language of symmetries, what doesn't change under transformations and this and that. And can we define God in those terms? Well, the whole question of how to speak of God is a very complicated one, and I don't think we could do that very quickly. But what I would want to do is perhaps go back to the previous question, and to which we had these beautiful answers, and add some other perspectives to it. The first perspective, which provides us some information on variety of stages that we all stand in different stations in our life. There's this dialogue in Chandogya Upanishad where Virochana and Indra both go to Prajapati to ask him, who am I? And Prajapati, who's a embodiment in this dialogue of God, says, you look into the water and you'll get your answer. And Virochana, who's the leader of the demons, which is, a demon is somebody who believes that we are nothing but our body, who believe that the only existence there is body. So Virochana looks into the pool of water and sees his face, and he says, well, this is it, I've found what my answer is. And Indra does that, and for some time he thinks maybe that's what it is, but then he starts asking questions that, look, in my dreams, I'm not what I see myself in this pool of water. And also, as you grow old, and this was the point that Dr. Dubey made, that there is something that is still a constant. And that constant, that unchangeable thing, is like the axis. If you were to, at night, look at the whole spectacle of stars going round and round, there seems to be an axis to the physical universe, right? And that's because of the rotation of the earth. We know the reason for it. But there seems to be a similar axis to our very being, because we are changing all the time. Our memories become hazy. We forget a lot of the stuff that we held so dear just so few years ago. And we are physically old, but our self within us does not age. That self is still as young as that self was when we are much younger. So this axis within, this is another question which was asked of me in between the break, is that Ishvara, and which is why Ishvara is represented as that pillar. There is a famous hymn in Atharva Veda about the skamba, the pillar, the universal pillar, that neither, that no gods can fathom because it's so huge. It's that Ishvara within, it's that pillar which holds our experiences together, giving us this sense that we are one whole. Because otherwise, if we were all transitory, if one were to accept the proposition, the Buddhist proposition, for example, that everything is transitory, anatma or anatta, the doctrine of anatta. But then what is it that holds us together? And why should we care if mind is just a projection of this ceaseless transition? And what the Vedas say is that this is that Atman, and the Bandhu that connected to the entire cosmos is what gives us this capacity to know. And that's why we are able to know. Otherwise, you could even, as a rational person said, how can I even know? And that's a reasonable question to ask. How can I know? This universe is huge. Even if you wanted to know things on a rational basis and you went to the University of Toronto library, you could not read all the books or make any sense of it in hundreds of lifetimes. There's so much of information connecting different processes and phenomena. So you cannot know the infinite manifestations and unfoldings of this cosmic being, which is what our universe is. But mysteriously, so there is an underlying mystery, and I think that is the central point, which we in Hinduism seem to have underplayed in the last 50 or 100 years, that we are nothing but science, and implying thereby that we are nothing but apara vidya. That's not true. There is a mystery. Hinduism, the Vedas are a tradition of mystery. And it's that tradition which is celebrated through the performance of yajna, for example. Because that's a performance which is supposed to engage our senses through incense, through music, through the whiffs of cold breeze early morning at 4 o'clock outside, so that you're not in a familiar environment, so that somehow you would snap out of your normal ways of doing things, which is sleepwalking, and suddenly awaken to the true witness, the true Atman within you. That's the way to know. Thank you.
I can tell you what it is called.
May I make a suggestion to Dr. Professor Shitanshu ji will be asking quick questions also, so that they can speak. Ji.
The soul is an element in the primordial matter.
I believe that was an observation. Thank you, sir. Professor Shitanshu ji, while you were outside, we thought we elected you as our moderator in terms of the questions we asked. Ji, yes. And as Dr. Kark was saying, tasya matam yasya matam na veda saha. If you think you know well the truth but the ultimate reality, know that you know very little. It is not known to those who think they know it, it is known to those who know they cannot know it in its reality.
Thank you very much, Chandraji, for encouraging me to ask a question even prior to this.
They can come up
The
with
gadgets are not for me.
Maybe it might make sense. Shitanshu ji, please come here, then it will be much better.
Well, let me see, let me try out. Before the gadgets were out, people used to be talking and participating in discussions. Thank you very much for inviting, for encouraging me to ask questions. I have so many questions, I'm not threatened with very many questions. Actually, one of the, can I take a couple of minutes?
Ji, please.
One of the distinctive features of the dharmic tradition is raising questions. It's not a commandment style of religion. In the Gita, pariprashnena, you ask questions from all directions. That's what Sri Krishna advises, pariprashnena. So thank you very much. I think the dharmic tradition also has the distinctive feature of the challenge toward harmony. In the Gita, there are two expressions. One is Sam and another is Samatva. So spirituality is harmony. Now, having said this, I'm so pleased, and I expected Subhashka will be giving us some real knowledge. Please. And I'm so satisfied, I'm thirsty even more. But if I may, I know everything cannot be.
Tansuji, please come here, then it will be all of us will
I know everything cannot be covered, the gadgets create problems. Everything cannot be covered in one single setting, but I have a long-standing query regarding, why we have been slumbering not just 60 years, couple of centuries, about a millennium. Why are we fallen, unfortunately? What is the history behind it? You must be more conscious about that, being from Kashmir. We gave rise to Kashmir Shaivism. And what happened to that now? What happened to Kashmir? Now, has that something to do with the loss of our psyche? Is that the reason for our long slumber? And perhaps if we know the history, not in any militant way, but in an analytic way, then we can go back to our previous thrust towards spirituality, which encompasses science.
Well, I guess I'm just waiting for Dr. Sitanshu Chakravarti to come up. Okay, all right. Well, the question is, why is it that India is slumbering? What happened? Is it recent, or is it of a greater, much ancient vintage? Okay. Perhaps some answer to it at least begins to form a shape if you look at the last 200 years. Because according to comparative economists like Donald Kennedy, for example, who's compared civilizations or big economies over the past 1,000 years in his book called The Decline of Great Powers. He claims that 200 years ago, before the coming of the British, India's share of the world economy was 25%. By the time they left, it was less than 1%. So what happened? Because the British did not do oppression in a kind of an obvious way. But something did happen. So what happened? What happened certainly was that in the early 19th century there was industrial revolution, the world economy changed, but there was no corresponding industrial revolution in India because there were no investments made. So India just became a net purchaser of the products of say factories from Manchester and other places, and India became poorer and poorer and poorer. So that's recent history. But if you go much further back, there was clearly something that had already happened which had set the stage for a weakening, if you will, of the Indian psyche. That's a correct expression, a grammatical expression, because there were certain parts of the South Asian subcontinent which were not under British rule, which were independent, just as such as Nepal. But Nepal was also slumbering, so something was missing. And one can work backwards and say that, well, maybe what helped Europe was the discovery of the New World with all the extra capital that came in, and they were able to invest in scientific enterprise, and that's what gave them the fillip. But I think there's something more which provided a fillip to Europe, and that was an attachment to nature and looking at nature with open eyes of wonderment. You know, the whole idea of nature, Prakriti, or the goddess being the teacher. And I think if I were to express it slightly differently, if one were to love salvation beyond everything, as Isha Upanishad says, Andham tamah pravishanti ye avidyam upasate. Into blind darkness fall those who worship avidya. Let's say avidya means the body, and we could say that this is a statement which addresses the current state of the world. But the second line says that into greater darkness fall those who are absorbed only in their salvation, in vidya. I think that's the secret of what happened to India. Because I guess everybody, you know, it's that balance that you need. Everybody in India, or the wise people, were so wrapped up by their personal salvation. And they were wonderful people. But that's not enough. You also have to pay homage to Sangha. You know, the Buddhists say, Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. You know, it's not just Dharma, but also Sangha that is essential. Because we are not defined just by our personal self, social self and personal self. Because who we are is also a consequence of our relationship and connections to other people in society, but also across generations. And you see, that seems to have been lost in the West now, because as you look at Europe, Europe is deciding not to have any children, for example, right? Because Europeans, because of the avidya-based education and entertainment and culture and everything else, has absorbed the notion that we are nothing but our personal self, right? Consumption at the personal level. So it's to be connected to that larger current. And I think that's where India had already taken a wrong turn, in spite of the great achievements of Abhinav Gupta, for example, of Kashmir Shaivism, or Ramanujacharya, or Madhvacharya, and many, many others. They were individual meteors who kept on coming up all across India, in all corners. However, the larger life had reached a point where that harmony, where that need for those two wings that I was speaking of in the morning, one related to the personal self, the other to the social self, one related to the body, the other to the spirit, that had snapped. And it's one of those, you know, currents, those twists of God's will, that we perhaps did need the English to awaken us from that slumber. You know, God's will manifests itself in all these strange ways. You do need suffering sometime. A rebirth can take place only at the end of suffering. And I think that suffering was essential. Because even before 8th century, when Somananda did Kashmir Shaivism, the beginning, the Shiva Sutras, I think we had already stepped on there was a kind of a Baroque nature that had attached itself to the way we were relating to reality. And it was essential for us to come back to reality in its naked, true sense, fashion, to which we have been reminded by modern sages like Aurobindo and others, Ramakrishna, Aurobindo and others. So that I think what is happening, that all that suffering was essential, but it's prepared us. And I think the renaissance that we are taking place, not place outside, perhaps in the realm of spirit, outside the shores of India, Bharatvarsha, but within India, in the sphere of the material, because that's what Indians, there's something in the air in India right now. Everybody wants to be rich. And I think that's also essential. Let them do that. And that would prepare them for the next step. So I think, as far as I can sense it in my bones, that things seem to be coming together. After Kali Yuga comes Satya Yuga. so let's celebrate where we stand. Thank you.
Could I make a comment? Based on what you just said, are you supporting or corroborating fatalism and karma? Because what you're saying, it's okay to suffer. Yes, we should suffer in order to take rebirth.
No.
Is that okay?
No, yes.
Are you blaming the British, or are you saying that the British may have had is the reason for India's downfall? Or is it this way that we are fatalistic? I mean, we keep saying it's our karma. It's our karma. Because I've heard that many times.
No, not at all. Let me first talk about the British. What I was saying was that the British became an instrument, unknowing instrument which helped unleash certain currents and forces which awakened us to our true self. That's one. Second, the Vedic way is not about fatalism itself. It's about true freedom. Since we are Atman, I am Atma Brahma. The Atman and Purush are the same. When we are awakened to creativity, then each one of us becomes an instrument, an agent creating the new world. So we are not, it's to look at Hinduism, to look at the Vedas as a system of belief in blind faith is absolutely wrong. It's not, it couldn't be further from that. It's fatalistic to the extent that if we are not awakened, then of course it's our karma which will determine what's going to happen to us. Because then we are only acting like the Pashu, which is the ground stuff on which we are. There is a Pashu nature. Then we are acting like Pashu. Then we don't really have that agency to transform the world. But when we are awakened, which is what we are supposed to be awakened, which is when we become gods and goddesses, that's when we have that capacity to transform the world. And that's what we are supposed to be.
I just want to add my 2 cents worth. When Lord Krishna left the earth, there was a lot of adharma, a lot of human sacrifices, animal sacrifices, and then Buddha came. When Buddha came, the whole country was practically turned to Buddhism because of Ashoka. And then the great Adi Jagat Guru Shankaracharya came and established Vedic Dharma. And the country was progressing extremely well. In 1947, there were only 330 million people in India. Today, there's over a billion? Over a billion people. But what led us, the Mughals to come and attack us, the British to come and attack us? Because we are people who say, Janedo. We don't have the spirit of unity to stand up to these people, and that is what has happened to India, because we don't, and Hinduism is a very simple religion. Whatever happened, my karma, I take it. We don't have what other religions have. Islam has one God and one book, yet Sufis can't worship in Sunni mosque, as Sunnis can go to Ahmadiyya mosque, but one book, one God. Christian, one book, one God, one Bible, one Jesus. Yet the Catholics would not worship in the Protestant,
The Protestant would not go and worship with the Lutheran would not go and worship with. Is that true? Hindus have what? Millions of gods. Yet every Hindu will go to a temple and be quite accepting of it. This is the beauty of it. But because of this, we have become rather lazy. And when we become lazy, we become disunited. And spirituality, as Dr. Kak has mentioned, has gone out of India for some time. But you know what? I don't see the spirituality coming to India. He said materialism is embraced by India now. And unless we turn back to spirituality, the glory of Bharat will no longer be there. We have to get back to spirituality, I think, before the glory. Look at today. Who is ruling India? Who? Who is ruling India today? Is this going on television? They might not let me go back to India again. Look at the people who used to rule India. Jawaharlal Nehru, philosophers, and Rajendra Prasad. Those were not ordinary people. They were not ordinary human beings. They were well-schooled people, and they were honest people. Lal Bahadur Shastri. I don't know what was happening after that. I am not going to say it on television what was happening after that. But look, who is influencing the trend of India today? That is why India, economically, the GDP might be 9%. Manmohan Singh was here the other day, we went to the dinner there. He says GDP was 8%, it's going to go to 10%. But what is happening to India? Dust, global warming, you can't even breathe. And also, because of this, there are people who are rising up in India, fighting against poverty in India, because they have nothing, and those who have don't share it. And because of this, we are like this in India. I think we have to get a more social conscience, and we have to be more spiritual, as Dr. Subhashji has said. And if we are more spiritual, we will be blessed, and then Bharat will be Bharat. You know, Bharat is called Bharat because of a king whose name was Bharat. And if you go to Indian passport, I don't have one, but if you go to Indian passport, you will see it in Hindi, it's written Bharat. But what? On the outside, mark passport of India. India is an English name. Bharat is our name. Bande Mataram. Thank you.
I want just for a moment to add